Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Wednesday, December the 24th, 2025. Today, Venus moves into Capricorn. So we now have 3 planets in Capricorn. We've already got the Sun and Mars in this sign, and today Venus joins them. And in this video, I want to look at Venus in Capricorn in some detail. But first of all, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Christmas Eve 2025. And so here is the chart for today, set for noon, New York time. And don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. So as far as what is happening today, the moon is in late Aquarius, 25 degrees 40 of the sign. So it's getting ready to move into Pisces, and it moves into Pisces on Thursday, Christmas Day, at 1:09 a.m. London time. So that means that this evening in the United States, we have Venus moving into Capricorn. In fact, it might be sort of late afternoon in California. California time, I think that would be at sort of 5:09 p.m. So we do have the moon moving into Pisces, and that does create a bit of a change. Sort of with the moon moving into Pisces, that creates maybe some sort of extra emotion. We'll have 3 planets in Pisces. Indeed, if you count the North Node, it's maybe 4 planets. I don't really count the North Node as a planet though. So we're about to have the Moon, Saturn, and Neptune in Pisces, and I think that is important. It does place an emphasis on Pisces and the collective, because Saturn and Neptune, certainly Neptune, are collective planets. So when the moon moves into Pisces, you could argue that collective forces are emphasized. But really, I think I'll talk about that tomorrow when I do the horoscopes for Thursday. So aside from that, from the moon moving into Pisces, we have Venus making a square to Neptune. So Venus is right at the end of Sagittarius. At least it sort of starts the day right at the end of Sagittarius, and it makes a square to Neptune. So Venus square Neptune, I talked about that yesterday. It can be a little bit up in the air. We're not quite sure what's going on, and certain relationships can seem sort of maybe nebulous, and it might be difficult to know whether people are telling the truth. There could be some sort of lies and deceptions, perhaps a bit of make-believe. I mean, just because someone lies, well, they might not be lying. They might not know that they're saying something which is misleading. So, it's important with Venus square Neptune not to take things at face value. Also, watch your own emotions. Your emotions might be telling you things which aren't necessarily true. And that particularly applies if you're talking about relationships. You think you understand that someone else, but maybe you don't. And then Venus moves into Capricorn. And, I will be talking about Venus in Capricorn in some detail at the end of the video, but there are a couple of things which we need to be aware of. Venus is moving into an Earth sign. I think on balance, Venus's condition is improving. I mean, the thing about Venus moving into Capricorn is that it is in a mixed reception with Saturn. So, Venus is in Saturn's sign. Saturn is in Pisces, which is a sign in which Venus is exalted. So there's this sort of mixed sign exaltation reception between Venus and Saturn. So I would have said that Venus is strengthened by this sign change, although Venus does become combust. I regard combustion as being strongest when it takes place in the same sign. It's true that technically when Venus was in late Sagittarius, it was less than 8 degrees from the sun. You could argue but it was combust in late Sagittarius while the sun was in Capricorn. But I think it's particularly important, when both the sun and Venus, are in this sign. And, with sun Venus in Capricorn combust, it may mean that the Venus principle starts to be put under a certain amount of pressure. And remember, Venus is going faster than the sun, so Venus is catching up with the sun, so Venus is getting closer and closer to that sun. And how might that manifest? Well, there could be a sort of a quite sort of gendered side to that. I mean, and it may work differently depending on whether you're male or female. So from a female perspective, Venus conjunct the sun might represent a woman who is being taken for granted, who is not being taken seriously by someone else. That someone else, the sun, could be a male principle. Of course, that's not how it's always going to work. But if you're a woman and there's a man who has got perhaps a larger than life personality, or is arrogant, or has a high opinion of himself, then that Sun Venus conjunction could be a particular problem. Venus is also about beauty and art, and so you could say that if Venus is combust, it could be about bad art, not being able to tell what looks good. I don't want to push that point too far, but just consider that possibility that Venus might be undermined by being close to the sun. I mean, that is one view. On the other hand, Venus is at 0 degrees Capricorn. It's on the solstice point. Venus on the solstice point is very strong. Venus on the solstice point can be popular, can know how to get attention, can know how to project itself. So it is something of a mixed picture, Venus moving into Capricorn. But, on balance, I think it's probably a good thing. And, another thing about, Venus in Capricorn, I mean, Venus is moving into an earth sign. Venus rules the earth signs, at least according to William Lilly, but it rules the earth signs by day, and by night the moon rules the earth signs. So there's certainly a sympathy between Venus and earth signs, but maybe Venus works best in the hours of daylight. I mean, I know that it's pretty close to the solstice, so if in the northern hemisphere there isn't so much daylight, but there's still enough. And of course, if you're in the southern hemisphere, then there's loads of daylight. I mean, relatively speaking, and the more south you are, the more daylight there'll be. So if you're on the southern tip of Chile, then you've got a great chunk of the day to enjoy Venus's many, many benefits. Aside from that, we have Mercury making a semi-square to Pluto. Mercury is... where's Mercury gone? Mercury's at 1742 Sagittarius. So it's 15 degrees, 45 degrees away from Pluto, 1/8 of the circle. So Mercury semi-square Pluto, well, it can be persuasive. Mercury-Pluto can always be persuasive. Pluto perhaps can seek out another person's weak spots, someone's vulnerabilities, know what to say, know how to deliver the message. That's one way of looking at it. But Mercury semi-square Pluto can be about the Mercury principle being maybe blocked out by Pluto. Pluto can be quite a heavy influence, and there are things we want to say, but perhaps the words don't quite come out. So that is one way of looking at this aspect. And then we've got semi-sextile between the Sun and Pluto. So the Sun is around 3 degrees Capricorn. Pluto is at almost 3 degrees Aquarius. So the Sun being 30 degrees from Pluto can mean that there's something we're trying to get together. We would like things to be straightforward. Sun in Capricorn, just doing what is expected of us, doing what is necessary, slowly moving towards our goal. But then Pluto comes along. Pluto represents maybe quite a heavy influence that we may be a little bit afraid of, but we kind of know it's important. And so if we can somehow acclimatize ourselves with this influence, it's not about running away from it. It's about understanding it. It's about becoming part of something, and maybe accepting that at some level some transformation is required. But if we really want to be ourselves, if we really want to express our identity, something might have to change. So that's the picture in New York. If we set the day for noon New York, if we set the day for noon in Sydney, Australia, Moon is earlier in the sign. Moon is making a sextile to Mercury, and in my video for yesterday I talked quite a lot about Moon sextile Mercury. And so what I was saying yesterday, perhaps applies to you if you are in Australia or New Zealand or East Asia. And so Moon sextile Mercury may very much define the day. There is a lot that can be said, and conversation can be amusing, and it can also be enlightening. And so if something needs to be said, then maybe you should try and say it, and it just might not be quite as difficult as you had imagined. So I think in Australasia, I think the ability to communicate is quite pronounced. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the Sun at the center of the solar system. And if we do that, we see that Venus is trine Chiron. So Venus is quite a fast-moving planet, and it makes a trine it makes a heliocentric trine to Chiron. So Venus trine Chiron perhaps gives us a certain sympathy. I mean, we can sympathize with other people's views, and we can also understand. We have an understanding perhaps of why people do what they do. It's not easy to really get a grips with another person's motivations, but I think if it is possible, it may be possible with Venus trine Chiron, and perhaps part of it is that we can relate to people in a slightly unusual way. And the question is, why is that important? People have standard procedures for relating. They say the same things. One word is answered by another word. That's how people relate. That's how people, get on with each other in many cases. But with Venus trine Chiron, you can get on with people in an unusual way. You can do something that wasn't expected. And because you do something that wasn't expected with slightly unusual, you may be able to form a particular kind of relationship, perhaps quite an unusual relationship with this Venus trine Chiron. And when you think about Chiron, you do think about the unusual, doing things differently. And the reason you do things differently, well, it's perhaps because there's something you're trying to avoid. If you relate to people in the same old ways, then you come up with the same old problems, and maybe the same old wounds are afflicted. And with a different approach, you may be able to, get around these problems and be able to have healthy relationships, which don't lead to wounds. Because wounds. Well, we always have to think about wounds when we're talking about Chiron. But I think with this Venus trine Chiron, I think that they can be avoided. Although Venus is a planet of relationships, and sometimes with Venus trine Chiron, it's easy to feel sorry for oneself in terms of how you relate to another person. Perhaps you feel you're not being treated quite as well as you should be. But on the other hand, when Venus is trine Chiron, you can do things differently. You can perhaps express yourself in a way which is quite assertive. And if you need to really explain your particular view and perhaps be assertive in the process, and I think that's something that you very much can do. So it's time to look at the 12 signs. And when we're talking about Christmas Eve, I mean, the problem about Christmas Eve, I don't know, it's an interesting day. It kind of depends where you are. Christmas Eve is treated differently in the United Kingdom than it is, I think, in, say, Central Europe. There are different Christmas customs. In Central Europe, it's the evening meal, which is the high point of Christmas, as the 24th turns to the 25th. But you don't quite get that certainly in the UK. As far as the United States are concerned, well, I'm still getting used to the United States. I've been here over 10 years, but I'm still trying to work out Christmas customs. But certainly Christmas Day and Christmas Eve can be treated very differently depending on where you are. But I kind of feel I have to assume at some level that it's not Christmas Eve at all, that the day isn't special. I mean, not everyone takes Christmas seriously. I mean, you have to see Christmas Eve as being something, very, very productive, potentially. I mean, it can be productive. I remember, the most productive Christmas I had was, it was a long time ago. I was writing. I mean, I don't really know anything about computer coding, but I was writing this trying to work out how to do a computer code for a tarot program, which was a long time ago. But I spent all Christmas doing it, and I was completely alone, and I covered a huge amount of ground. I really got to grips with it, and I did quite well with the program. It didn't go badly. By the way, I did buy a pack of tarot cards recently. I mean, just it's on the way. I haven't seriously looked at the tarot cards for some time, because I've kind of been focused on the I Ching. I haven't really been into the tarot since the 90s, but for some reason I decided to buy a pack of tarot cards. I just felt that it was the right thing to do. Yeah, I mean, I have had a past association with it. Anyway, sorry, I'm rambling. But what I'm saying is that we shouldn't assume that Christmas Day is special. It needn't be special. It can be another day. It can be a day that can be very productive. And certainly the best Christmas I ever had was when I was completely alone, when I didn't see anyone. I just covered so much ground. Anyway, that I think maybe reflected in what I say. I've got to try to remember that it is Christmas Eve. Maybe that will colour my forecasts for the 12 signs. So anyway, these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Wednesday, December the 24th, 2025. Aries, you're still capable of being, pretty sociable, with the moon moving through Aquarius, and the moon moving through Aquarius does allow you to, it allows you to get on with people, to be relatively natural, relatively spontaneous, but you just might have a feeling that things aren't necessarily going anywhere. Yeah, people are friendly enough, but how sincere are they? I mean, it's not that they're doing anything wrong. It's just that the question you have is, well, what is the point? And so, don't get sort of too worked up about anything on a social level. People behave in a particular way, and they might be ever so slightly disinterested. But maybe that's just because it's Christmas Eve, because it's the holiday season. People have other things to do, and maybe they're thinking about tomorrow and it's Christmas. But if you are going to any parties or going to a pub today on Christmas Eve, it's fine. But it might just feel that something is ever so slightly missing, but it's not necessarily a big deal. And if you do feel that something is missing, then maybe, Aries, you can do something to perhaps stir things up. I think that your ability to get noticed is still going to be pretty good. And how do you get noticed? I think you can just get noticed by being yourself and just not being too self-conscious about what you say and what you do, particularly what you say. You say something, and if you really mean it, if it's completely sincere, then inevitably it gets attention. And if there's something that you feel needs to be talked about, Aries, then I think you can talk about it, and you won't mince your words. At least you don't have to mince your words. So if you want to make an impression through the power of your verbal output, then I think that you very much can. Now, as far as other people are concerned, well, I've talked about things from a social perspective, and I'm thinking, well, yeah, there's stuff going on, but it's probably not actually going anywhere. From a sort of interpersonal perspective, it may be that there is a change. Venus is moving into Capricorn, and so with Venus moving into Capricorn, you might notice that some people are moving from sort of one stage to another stage. Perhaps partners and others are clearer. They're able to be more decisive, and they're able to sort of communicate their ambitions. You become clear about what people want, and it's all kind of very sort of no nonsense. And I think that is that's definitely a good thing. It's something that is it's very much there to be welcomed. And incidentally, when Venus moves into Capricorn, it starts making a conjunction to Mars. So you can see that Venus is at 0 degrees Capricorn, Mars is at 7 degrees Capricorn. Yeah, and because Venus is moving towards a conjunction of Mars, you're going to start feeling it. And I know that the Sun is in the middle, but so that what will happen is that Venus will catch up with the Sun, and then it will just move on and make that conjunction. So what's that Venus-Mars conjunction about? Yeah, that Venus-Mars conjunction could be about relationships, and the image we perhaps get of that Venus conjunct Mars is perhaps you and someone else slowly getting closer to one another, for whatever reason. Okay, it might be romantic, but it is possible, because it's in Capricorn, it might be some kind of partnership, perhaps of a business nature. So if you're feeling that you need someone's help and support in order to get something off the ground, then it does seem that assistance is on its way, via the growing influence of this Venus-Mars conjunction. It's just beginning, but I thought I needed to mention it. I don't think it's anything I want to go into detail about, right now. Taurus. Venus is changing sign. That is the big event. Venus moving out of Sagittarius and into Capricorn. So Venus moving into Capricorn, on balance, is probably a good thing. I think Venus in Sagittarius has started to become just a bit difficult. Venus in Sagittarius had made a square to Saturn. It made square to Neptune. In fact, today Venus makes a square to Neptune. And Venus square Neptune just can mean that you don't fully know what's going on. It's just difficult to work it all out. And there are potentially lots of false leads. And in terms of other people, your social life and relationships, it's hard work, and it may be hard work because other people are being misleading, but it's possible that you might be giving off false signals, or you're just misleading people. Not that you're deliberately misleading people, you just might be doing it somehow, that you've got these sort of unconscious smoke screens are being created. And with Venus moving, Venus in very late Sagittarius making that square to Neptune, it's just difficult to know what's going on. And then Venus changes sign. Venus moves into Capricorn, and I think that is a big change. And while Venus is in Capricorn, you can be more definite. You can be clearer about who you are, and in many respects, you can be more grounded, and this might have an influence, on your priorities and what you believe in. And, you think about your belief systems. I mean, your belief systems matter right now. You've already got Sun and Mars in Capricorn. Venus is joining it, and so if you feel that you need to believe in something, you need to believe in something that obviously inspires you, but it's more than that. You need something that is grounding as well, that can bring you down to earth, that can basically make sense of things. I mean, that is part of what a belief system is. Because if you don't have a belief system, if you don't believe in anything, things can be really difficult. Because you have to make up your mind on everything. But if you have a belief system, your belief system can make up your mind immediately. It doesn't matter what the situation is. You know what your response is. You know how you're going to vote. You know what sort of opinion is best to express. So finding the right belief system, can be important. And maybe this is something about, the next few weeks, really asking yourself, what does it mean to hold a particular faith, or to have a particular ideology at the center of who you are. It makes things easier, but of course there's always a danger of inflexibility. It doesn't matter what the belief system is. There has to be the capacity to change it, because if you get too stuck with your beliefs, you might end up getting nowhere, or maybe even worse than nowhere. You could just become quite dogmatic, finding the wrong beliefs, and that's not what you want. And one aspect of Venus moving into Capricorn is that it perhaps allows you to get in touch with something of major importance. And remember, Capricorn is the solstice point. So Venus on the solstice point represents your relationship with the world, your understanding of the world, what the world is all about. And once you get to grips with what the world is all about, then you can start developing your own personal philosophy, something that you will stand by. And maybe it starts with your own emotional response to what is happening, but you don't want to get completely caught up with global events and what's happening around you, what's happening in your community, what's happening in your global community. It can get rather confusing. But at least Venus is in Capricorn, and Venus in Capricorn can be sensible. It knows what it can do, and it knows its own limits. So Taurus, that's perhaps what you need to remember. You should take things as far as you can, but at the same time, you need to know when to stop. And I think that Venus and Capricorn will help you to define your own boundaries. Gemini. Mercury is your ruler, and Mercury is in Sagittarius. And so you could say that with Mercury in Sagittarius, there may be times at the moment where you feel that you're not in full control, that you have to listen to other people. You might not like what they say, but you have to take into account their opinions because it's necessary. If you don't take into account other people's opinions, if you don't listen to what they say, then you might end up being lost, maybe unpopular as well. I mean, you have to be part of humanity, like it or not. Especially with Mercury in Sagittarius, your opposite sign, and Mercury does make a semi-square to Pluto. And the question is, is this semi-square to Pluto a good thing or a bad thing? It could be a good thing if we regard Mercury semi-square Pluto as being about your beliefs and maybe holding firm to what you believe in, regardless of what's happening around you, then in the end, I think you will be respected. It's not a time for compromising what you believe in. But there is another way of looking at Mercury semi-square Pluto. Mercury semi-square Pluto might indicate that for one reason or another you can't express yourself. You feel stuck, you feel tongue-tied. Perhaps as far as you're concerned, you're dealing with powerful forces, powerful people, and you're going to get ignored, and if you say anything, it'll just make matters worse. I think that would be the wrong approach. I think that it is a time, Gemini, when you need to be looking at the positive side of that Mercury semi-square Pluto. You can bring to bear your own beliefs, your own ideas, and you know how to be heard. And being heard isn't just about making a lot of noise. It's not just about lecturing people. It's also about taking the time to understand how far you can go. I think you can go a long way, but it's still a good idea to know the limits of your own power. That way you won't embarrass yourself. So overall, I think that it can be quite a powerful day, and additionally, you have a chance to maybe be quite dramatic. I think you can be dramatic, and you can create big changes out of nowhere, which might almost seem revolutionary, violently revolutionary. Well, I'm not saying you should be violent. That's not what I'm saying. But if change is required, then well, what can you do? Though, if we're talking about violence, don't do anything stupid or careless. Get yourself into a heavy situation, or do anything that has a high risk. Because I just think right now, Gemini, the chances of a mishap, they're probably pretty small, but there is a signature here for Geminis to fall flat on their faces. I mean, it could happen, but only if you're careless, only if you're in too much of a hurry. So it's important to take things in a slow, systematic way, and you shouldn't feel that you have to do everything under the sun by the end of the day. But perhaps you might feel there's a hurry to sort things out by Christmas. No, by Christmas Day, no, just take things slowly, and don't give yourself the opportunity to trip up, because I think it would be unnecessary. Cancer. Another day with the moon in Aquarius. Okay, if you're in the United States, the moon will move into Pisces late afternoon, early evening, and not just the United States, I think in the Americas in general. But perhaps I have a better understanding of the United States time zones than I do the time zones of the Americas. But at some stage, if you are in the Americas, you will get the moon moving into Pisces, and that will create a change, and I think a favourable change. I think it's good for the moon to be in Pisces, but overall we have to accept the fact that for most of the day the moon will be in Aquarius, and with the moon in Aquarius, Cancer, you need to be somewhat cautious. You don't want to rush things. You know that some things are going to be perhaps more complicated than expected. You can't make assumptions, and as far as you're concerned, I don't think that you're going to be in the mood for being too open. There are things that you probably need to keep to yourself. I mean, you maybe just don't want to advertise them. You don't want other people to be involved in your world. I mean, your world is private, and so it's important to keep everyone at sort of arm's length, and perhaps further than that as well. So Cancer, we could see some complications forming. I mean, those complications are largely about other people. So, where there's other people, there is scope for a complication. And so probably today, as far as is possible in most cases, you should try to keep your distance. Yet Venus is moving into Capricorn. I mean, you've already got the Sun and Mars in Capricorn, and now Venus is there as well. So with 3 planets in Capricorn, well, that might say something about you and other people and how you relate to them. I mean, I think there's certainly an advantage in steering clear of other people, but if you are involved in them, then you've got to accept the situation, and you're not going to be in a position where you can just fully be yourself. You've got to do some listening. You've got to try to understand what other people are saying, what's important to them, and it's going to be hard work, but maybe it's the right thing. And having Venus moving into Capricorn, I think that's potentially quite favorable as far as relationships are concerned. Venus might represent another person who is trying to sort of come into your life, and someone who probably can be trusted. That is certainly a way of looking at Venus, and it's therefore important that you pay attention over the next few days. You keep your eyes open, look at what people are doing. Is anyone trying to get your attention for whatever reason? So if someone is trying to get your attention, try to understand what they're trying to communicate. It might be something important, it might be something enlightening. So don't ignore anything, and just be on the lookout for sort of signals and people trying to tell you stuff. But when the moon moves into Pisces, as I've already just said, moon moves into Pisces late in the day if you're in the Americas. If you're not in the Americas, well, the moon is not going to move into Pisces today. It doesn't move into Pisces until tomorrow. I make it 1:09 a.m. on Thursday morning, the morning of Christmas Day. So it just does apply to those of you in the Americas. And so when the moon moves into Pisces, that does create a change. A moon moves into a water sign. It allows you to perhaps be more sort of emotional than usual. You can sort of go with the flow, and in the process you can start to understand what is going on. You can get some idea of what it's all about, and this could be quite spiritual. You can get a feeling that there is something looking after you. There's something with you. It's with you all the time, and it will make sure that in the end nothing bad happens. Leo, there is a possibility, Leo, that you put your energy in the wrong places. I mean, it can happen. You perhaps get excited about something. It seems interesting, and you don't really think it through. You just keep moving, and you try to be as natural and spontaneous as possible. But yeah, in the process, yeah, you might get involved in something that isn't necessarily desirable. And so if you find yourself in that position, the question is, what do you do? I think, part of you, doesn't want to be rude. So you just carry on. But on the other hand, what if you're compromising yourself? I mean, you could be compromising yourself. And if you are compromising yourself, then, maybe you need to sort of take swift action to sort things out. So, really, really think about what is happening, and think maybe also about how you might be being subtly manipulated into doing things, saying things which aren't necessarily, in your, best interests. But, I wouldn't necessarily worry too much about it. I mean, you're clearly someone who at the moment is able to get attention. There's something about you that is attractive, that people want to be part of. And so maybe you can use that opportunity. Perhaps use that opportunity to be putting yourself somewhere where you really do have a chance to, entirely, be yourself. And if you are yourself, then it's all a virtuous circle. You get support from other people. You are yourself, and because you're being yourself, you get even more support. So that does potentially look good. Though, as far as close relationships are concerned, the moon is moving through late Leo. It's, it's the end of not moving through late Leo, late Aquarius. It's moving through late Aquarius, moving through the end of your opposite sign. And so with the moon in late Aquarius, it may feel that in certain relationships, something is being just tidied up. And, you've done your bit, maybe they've done their bit, and maybe it's time to say goodbye. Particularly if it's a temporary relationship, maybe you've met someone, you've had something to do with them, there's been a connection, but maybe nothing lasts forever, and you move on, and it's great, no harm done. So different relationships have different roles, and you should be aware that some relationships are temporary. They're not there forever. They're just there to serve a particular purpose. Virgo, you probably feel that it's getting a little bit boring. There's just not so much going on. That doesn't mean you can do nothing. You still have to do something amongst the rather boring environment you might find yourself in. There's clearly work to be done, and it's a kind of work that, well, probably only you can do it. No one else can, and you do it, and you do it in a way that is hopefully sort of gracious and spontaneous. It's not a time to be getting angry. That would be counterproductive. I mean, you could get angry. I mean, there are things that might be annoying you, and you perhaps feel you're not getting enough support, that you're being ignored, that it's always down to you. But that's not really that's not really the right approach. I don't think that's a particularly fortunate approach. I think that you have to be aware that in certain situations there are shared responsibilities, and if you feel you're being taken for granted, then maybe you should say something about it. But Virgo, sometimes the person who can do it best is you, and if you can do it best, okay, it might seem unfair that you're the one having to deal with everything, but sometimes there's no choice. If you let someone else deal with it, well, they might mess it up. They might break something, or they might just not be able to follow instructions. And that is the problem about delegating responsibility. So it's probably a bad idea to delegate responsibility. Take charge, and if you do things on your own, I think that you'll do a good job, and you can be quite scrupulous, and really be aware of your responsibilities. And so once you start something, I think you'll be able to continue with it, and be patient, and don't have chips on your shoulder. You could, because there is an angry edge to today, especially if you think you're being taken for granted. And somehow, Virgo, you've got to get around that angry edge, because the problem about having an angry edge is the anger might be expressed in many different ways, and it's possible the anger gets expressed in ways that aren't necessarily fortunate, that could sort of backfire. So maybe, Virgo, you have to be open about your anger. If you're feeling annoyed about something, well, that's the way it is. Maybe in certain situations you should tell someone that you're annoyed, and if you do and you use the right words, then maybe that's a way of diffusing the situation. But I don't want to exaggerate any feelings of annoyance. The point is, Virgo, if you just get on with the job, don't feel resentful about it. I think that you can really do something that's really pretty competent. Not just competent, it may be pretty amazing once you really focus on what you have to do, and it could be a job done, and a job well done. Libra, we cannot avoid talking about Venus. Venus is your ruler. And so if we're trying to understand you, well, we have to track Venus. What is Venus doing? And what is Venus doing? Well, Venus is getting ready to change sign. And today it does change sign. It moves into Capricorn. So with Venus moving into Capricorn, it might be that your overall stance does change. You may be become more disciplined, and also you become aware of what can go wrong, and you don't want to be in a position where things could go wrong. They might go wrong, but why take risks? I don't think it's a situation where risks are necessary. But still, I think you have to be somewhat careful, and you know that. And so, by putting yourself in a safe position, somewhere where how everything is going to unfold, and then that just might very much be the best approach. And that's perhaps what Venus in Capricorn is all about. Venus in Capricorn, Capricorn is a sensible place for Venus, and so you know that the best place for you is where you are out of trouble, and you can be completely out of trouble, and you can just be thinking about what is important to you, and not necessarily feeling that you have to do anything necessarily. On the other hand, that something big is happening in the world. It's happening sort of all around you. Powerful forces are being unleashed. There is a need for freedom, for being able to break out, just being enclosed, perhaps tightly enclosed, and that's not what you wanted, and just maybe something has to give. That might be how some Librans feel, that something does have to give. And if you do feel that, well, the sooner something gives, the better. You don't want to build something up. You don't want to get get into a situation where things get tenser and tenser and tenser, and then it all sort of blows up at the last minute. It's better to be open and honest about yourself and what you're looking for, and also what is acceptable. And if you tell people what's acceptable, then I think is going to make things a lot easier. But by and large, Libra, I think that you're going to be quite cautious, and I think as the day progresses you could become more cautious, especially once the moon moves into Pisces. So the moon will move into Pisces certainly this evening if you're in the Americas, or even late afternoon. Now that if you're in Europe, then the moon will not move into Pisces until tomorrow, until Christmas Day. But that's what you should be looking for. And with even if a moon is in Aquarius, that's about you maybe trying your hardest to make the most out of something, but you can't really take it any further, or take it much further, and you've got to take what you have and really knock it into shape. And that might mean hard work. It might mean that you need a lot of discipline. But Libra, I'm confident that you have what it takes. Scorpio. For most of the day, Scorpio, you are probably going to be inclined to do, well, nothing very much. You're going to be you're going to be independent-minded, I think, while the moon is in Aquarius. You're going to have particular ideas about the way things should be done. I don't think you're going to want to deviate from these ideas, so you keep going. You've already made up your mind. You don't want to shift, and if that's the way you feel, then probably you should continue with this approach. Although if you are in the United States, at some stage I think there will be a change towards the end of the day when the moon moves out of Aquarius and into Pisces. Not just the United States, but I think the Americas overall. So when the moon moves into Pisces late in the day in the Americas, you do feel that something has changed. While the moon was in Aquarius, you were perhaps holding on to something, maybe holding on to something for dear life. But when the moon moves into Pisces, it's just easier. Pisces is a sign that Scorpio gets on pretty well with. So moon moving into Pisces means that it's just easier to be relaxed and spontaneous. And I think you're also going to be more trusting. I think you start the day finding it relatively difficult to trust people, but as the day progresses, once the moon moves into Pisces, then it's just easier to relate, and you know what to say, you know what to do, and you do have a chance to really be able to express your creativity, and I think you can do that extremely well. So overall, Scorpio, I think that it's a day when you need to hold firm. You need to hold firm to what you believe in. You may not feel that you're too strong. I think you are pretty strong, actually. I think that you're able to give as good as you get. If you run into any opposition, you get criticism, perhaps. I'm not saying you will get criticism, but if you do get criticism, if you run into harsh words, you'll know what to say. And once you start defending yourself verbally, then I think that the other person will back off pretty quickly. So I think you know how to look after yourself, Scorpio. I don't think there's any problem in that department. Sagittarius. Well, we only now have one planet in Sagittarius, and that's Mercury. Mercury alone in Sagittarius. Venus has left Sagittarius. I mean, it's better for nothing. Mercury is still there. I mean, with Mercury in Sagittarius in your sign, you've still got lots of things to say, lots of things you can talk about, and I think that Additionally, you can be someone who is exciting. No doubt about that. You've certainly got something to offer, but it's not all about excitement and drama. These planets are, the planets that were not so long ago in Sagittarius are now in Capricorn. Venus has left Sagittarius. You've got the Sun in Sagittarius, Mars in Sagittarius. So with these, sorry, let me say it again. You've got Venus, Sun, and Mars in Capricorn. So these planets that used to be in Capricorn, in Sagittarius, they're not there anymore. So we know these Capricorn planets might mean that you've got to start to think about something else. It's not just about starting something. It's the question of how do you see it through to a successful conclusion. And very often, the way to see something through to a successful conclusion is to make sure it doesn't cause you too much damage, that it's not a drain on your resources. If something is costing you too much money, how long can you continue with it? Although another way of looking at it would be to say, how do you achieve your aims if you haven't got sufficient money to pay for things? Sometimes things do have to be paid for. But with these Capricorn planets, there is pressure to be reasonable. Capricorn is not an extravagant planet. Sorry. Capricorn is not an extravagant sign. And because Capricorn is not an extravagant sign, there are always, ways of doing things, and you can be sensible, and you can also be quite frugal. I think Sagittarians are going to be frugal. They can be frugal over Christmas if we're talking about money. Of course, Christmas is a time traditionally when people do spend a lot of money. Maybe you've already spent a lot of money, I don't know. But I think that today the expenditure does stop. So if you're still buying Christmas presents, where does one buy Christmas presents? Of course, everyone sort of goes online now, don't they? And sort of online are now saying they can't deliver until after Christmas. So it is a problem. I think I was reading about, what do you do if you haven't bought someone a Christmas present and it's, 5 o'clock on Christmas Eve, in the days before the internet and immediate delivery? Well, I think the advice was you go to an airport. This was an article in the UK. You go to an airport because there's always something open to buy a present. I don't know whether you have to go and visit an airport. That seems a rather difficult thing to have to do. But if that is the case, and maybe that's an idea. But perhaps the key point is that you don't have to spend as much money as you'd planned on doing, because Capricorn is a sensible sign, and with 3 planets in Capricorn, you can be frugal, and you can look after your resources. You can sort of herd your resources, and make sure that you don't spend more than you have to, because I think expenditure is unnecessary, and that might be one good thing about Venus moving into Capricorn. It just prevents you from making mistakes, because when Venus, the beginning of the day, Venus was making a square to Neptune, and so with Venus making a square to Neptune, well, that might have encouraged you to do something stupid with money. You didn't really understand what was going on with money, maybe, and you might have been extravagant. But when Venus moves into Capricorn, that allows you to sort of settle down and get things in perspective. And very often spending a lot of money it's often an act of laziness. I'm not saying you're lazy, but one's trying to solve a problem of buying someone a present. So, for example, and one just throws money at this problem, and you can solve a problem like that by throwing money at it, but it's always a very unsatisfactory answer, and there's almost always a better way of doing it. And it does help if you can tune into your own imagination. You've got a powerful imagination, and you can use your imagination. And your imagination can be a way of saving yourself money. Capricorn. Well, we now have 3 planets in your sign. We have got Venus, Sun, Mars, all of those three personal planets are in Capricorn. And so, the Capricorn season has well and truly arrived. It is underway, and with Venus moving into Capricorn, I think that's really good news. It allows you to be very focused. Also, Venus is a planet of relationships, so you can come over as someone who is easygoing, charming. People like you. It's really good having Venus there. And also Venus is on the solstice point in 0 degrees Capricorn, so that boosts your social skills, even more. I mean, that's certainly one approach, but maybe there's something else you need to consider. And Venus in Capricorn, you could say, is quite a materialistic placement. Venus in Capricorn does look after its own interests. I mean, Capricorns know how to look after their own interests, and with Venus moving into Capricorn, you might be thinking about the road ahead, and you're not necessarily sidetracked by Christmas and whatever's going on over Christmas. You're thinking perhaps more strategically. What about the last week of December? Indeed, what about next year? And so, Capricorn, there is certainly merit in making sure that you are making sure you're giving attention to your own ambitions, to what is important for you. You don't have to slow down. I mean, just because it's Christmas Eve. And if something is just there, it's hanging over you, you feel it needs to be attended to, then, do give it your best shot. And if you're working over Christmas, and if you happen to be, then Capricorn, I really do think that you can, you can do a good job. You can cover a lot of ground, and you will, very much know what is important. But at the same time, that's not necessarily the impression you're going to give. I think you can give the impression of being just a nice, pleasant, friendly person. People are going to like you. You'll know what to say. You'll know what to do. You'll be warm. You'll be welcoming. But you'll also have a keen sense of self-interest. And so, that's great, because you can work constructively at all levels. And if you are doing something which does represent your self-interest, I think you can do it in such a way that doesn't attract outside suspicion. Is there any need to be suspicious? Well, sometimes you're involved in a zero-sum game. You do something, you get the advantage, and maybe someone else doesn't. We do live in a competitive world, and if there is any sort of competition of a financial or career nature happening over Christmas, I think you're in a good position to put yourself in a place where you could be the winner. Yeah, so perhaps a competitive streak is really coming out over Christmas. And if you do feel competitive and you feel you want to see through an advantage, then maybe, Capricorn, that's something you need to do. Aquarius. For much of the day, the moon is moving through your sign, and it's making a square to Uranus. So moon square Uranus. Well, I mean, the problem with Christmas Eve, is everyone is stuck together, and family members are perhaps closer than usual. So if you've got sort of moon square Uranus running into Christmas Day, potentially that could be a problem. Not everyone is necessarily going to agree with one another, and at the same time, some people are going to be very stubborn. They're going to really want to hold out in terms of whatever their beliefs are, their principles, and finding compromise today just could be surprisingly difficult. And the question is, should you try? Maybe you should just avoid troublesome people, even if they're members of your own family, and that way maybe you can have a quiet day. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to be a bad day. I'm just looking at potential here. And with the moon, moon moving through Aquarius, you have to think about yourself. And as far as is possible, it's a good idea to be quite sort of independent minded. And I think that is the right thing to do. Though I do think Aquarius, if you make the effort, you're able to give the impression of being friendly and sociable. I'm not saying that impression is necessarily true. Deep down you might have your misgivings, but I think Aquarius, you are able to certainly go through the motions of being friendly and just being a pleasant person. I'm sure you are a pleasant person, but it kind of depends, doesn't it? But just going through the motions might be enough. I mean, you don't want people to just be resentful or to question your motives or to think that you're being selfish. I mean, there is a selfish streak somewhere there. I mean, we all have a selfish streak, but perhaps that selfish streak is sort of linked up with your own desire to do things your way. And to an extent, Aquarius, you may not fully be a team player, and if you can do things on your own, then that might be best. Especially once Venus moves into Capricorn, as it will, and with Venus moving into Capricorn, all these planets in Capricorn, Venus, Sun, Mars in Capricorn, I think that that does indicate that there's the emphasis or Capricorn. Of course, it's a sign ruled by Saturn. Aquarius is also a sign ruled by Saturn, but Capricorn represents perhaps the passive side of Saturn, and maybe you don't really want to completely engage, and that's going to be your attitude over Christmas. So Aquarius, you can certainly be pleasant pleasant enough, but I think that your own independence is important to you, and you don't want to get too caught up in what your family is doing. I mean, it's nice to have your family around if your family is around, but Christmas, families all gets intense, could get troublesome. You don't want things to get intense, and perhaps you need to be aware of how the atmosphere changes, and the moment you feel things getting intense, maybe you just need to do something to lower the temperature. Pisces. At some stage, the moon does move into Pisces. Now, that might not be until tomorrow. Certainly, if you are outside the Americas, the moon doesn't move into Pisces until tomorrow, Christmas Day. So it's a moon in Pisces Christmas Day. But Christmas Eve, it's mainly a moon in Aquarius Christmas Eve, unless you're in the Americas. Now, if you're in the Americas this evening, or perhaps even late afternoon, if you're in California, for example, or Hawaii or Alaska, the moon does move into Pisces. It moves into your sign, and so obviously the moon moving into Pisces is got to be good, hasn't it? I mean, you like having a moon in Pisces, and when the moon moves into Pisces, it is of course in mutual reception with Jupiter, and Jupiter's in Cancer, moon is in Pisces. Moon and Jupiter are in each other's signs, and so I think that bodes quite well for Christmas, for Christmas Day certainly, and even Christmas Eve. Late on Christmas Eve, as the moon moves into Pisces, you're just starting to feel better, and you're feeling that something is moving, and maybe you can even get into the spirit of the Christmas spirit. I mean, different people have different attitudes to Christmas, but it's certainly possible. I'm sorry if I'm sort of got a sort of certain cultural bias here. I mean, I have to accept, whatever I believe in. I do come from a sort of a Christian background. I can't really help that. You think Christmas is, something that one can't avoid. So you remember all the Christmases. I don't know, when was the first Christmas I can remember? I don't know. But but apologies if there is a cultural bias. But if appropriate, do get into the Christmas spirit. I think you're going to be able to get into the Christmas spirit pretty well, especially once the moon leaves Aquarius and moves into Pisces. And part of this Christmas spirit, is about you perhaps being clever, showing people what you can do, but not in a way that is arrogant. You're not boasting or bragging. You just may have some tricks up your sleeve. You may have an opportunity to show off talents that you're not normally able to get into. But right now you can. It's just easy, and you're just maybe a good person to have around, and because you have a certain warmth to you that may almost be quite Christmassy in itself. But I mean, you're not going to be ill-disciplined. I mean, Saturn is in Pisces, so there's limits to how much warmth you have. I mean, I think you understand the importance of self-control, but also you perhaps understand the season. And if you happen to be in a Christian culture, maybe you don't. I mean, I don't know where you're calling from, where you're watching from. So that's an aspect of today, which I think overall is pretty fortunate. So things do look good. And yes, we've got Venus moving into Capricorn. Venus moving into Capricorn, I think that's important. Venus is a planet which has an association with Pisces through exaltation. Venus is exalted in Pisces. It's moving into Capricorn. So Venus moving into Capricorn is probably going to give a boost to your general ability to be sociable, to be friendly. And so over Christmas, if you are mixing with other people, if you're going to Christmas parties, if you're meeting with your family and friends, I think that you can have a good time. So overall, Pisces, I think today looks pretty good. And now it's time to look at Christmas Eve from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Wednesday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 46, which is pushing upward. In general, a pretty positive hexagram. It's about just making good progress. We have a goal. We want to move forward, and we are able to move forward. But we shouldn't think too much about the destination. It is enough to make progress. And, this hexagram, it doesn't have any moving lines. And, because there are no moving lines, that may say something about today. Maybe not a huge amount going on. And, this is, particularly the case perhaps if you're in Eurasia. The moon is, what's the moon doing? I mean, the moon is in late Aquarius, and it's going nowhere. It's void. I mean, the last aspect the moon makes is a square to Uranus, and so I should make it clear. Uranus is an outer planet. It's a discovered planet. When I'm talking about the void of course moon, what I mean is the moon having it made its last major aspect to a traditional planet. Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Chiron, they don't count. So the moon the moon is void, just making that square to Uranus. And so we might feel that, especially if we're not in the Americas. In the Americas, the moon does change sign. And it's at the beginning of Pisces at some stage in the day. So there's a slight difference there. But still, pushing upwards, no moving lines, means that we're starting to make progress, but I don't think we're going all the way there. We're not going to necessarily reach any destination today. Now, to get a better idea about what pushing upwards is all about, it might be a good idea to look at the nuclear hexagram. And the nuclear hexagram is hexagram number 54, which is a marrying maiden. And this gives us perhaps an idea about what this hexagram is really about. The marrying maiden, she's in a hurry. She wants to get married. She doesn't really want to go through the normal procedure. Slowly, getting closer to someone and being modest. And no. She's in a rush, and this is perhaps telling us something about pushing upward. We can make good progress. We can move towards our goal, whatever that might be. But we've got to think about appearances. If we're in too much of a rush to get things done, we want rapid progress. We want to sort things out. It just seems unseemly, and maybe it's to do with Christmas. People are just people are slow and people are cautious. And if anyone is just trying to be over ambitious and trying to do too much too quickly, that just might create the wrong impression. So that is a good reason why we shouldn't feel we absolutely have to see it through to the conclusion. It's just enough to make a start. And maybe we make a start today, and perhaps we come back to it in a few days' time. Maybe we, over Christmas we skip it, and we don't, we know that we have got other things to attend to. So it's not bad, but I think we do get this idea that not a great deal is happening today, and we shouldn't want too much to happen today. We should just be satisfied with fairly small gains. So one thing happening today, which I do want to talk about, is Venus moving into Capricorn. And so let's look at the chart of Venus moving into Capricorn. So here is the moment Venus moves into Capricorn, London time. It takes place today, Christmas Eve, which is a Wednesday, at 4:26 p.m. So here it is. Venus is exactly there, 0 degrees Capricorn, and it is in a mutual reception to Saturn. It's mixed reception. Venus is in the sign of Saturn. Saturn is in the exaltation of Pisces. Sorry, in the exaltation of Venus. So we've got a mixed reception between Venus and Saturn. So that is a reason why Venus is quite strong when it moves into Capricorn. It's also strong because it's in an Earth sign, and Venus rules the Earth signs by day. So the Venus principle, is particularly strong when the sun is above the horizon. Perhaps at the hours of during the hours of darkness, Venus does lose some of its strength. So, if while Venus is in Capricorn, you're trying to ingratiate yourself with anyone, you're trying to be sociable. Perhaps if you want to use that Venus energy, then perhaps you should be focusing on the hours of day rather than the hours of night. Now, Venus in Capricorn, it is the solstice point. And the solstice point is very much about the public, because Venus is square Aries, so it could be a time when people can present themselves. Venus, well, 'cause it's a female planet as well, so you might if you wanted to symbolize Venus on the Aries point, on the solstice point, you could say the woman in the news, the woman who relates to the public. Might be a theme for Venus conjunct the Aries point. I mean, I know it's Christmas Eve, so Christmas Eve things are slowing down, but it is a good time to sort of present oneself, regardless of what one's gender is. I think perhaps Venus in Capricorn, works better for women rather than men in general, simply because it's a female planet. And I think it's fine. I don't think there's anything wrong with Venus in Cancer. Now, Venus in Gemini. Now, as far as Venus and how it relates to the rest of the chart, one does need to think about the relationship between the Sun and Venus, because the Sun and Venus. Well, the Sun and Venus can be quite a distance apart. So when we were looking at Mercury, when we look at Mercury, for example, the Sun and Mercury, geocentrically, they can be in the same sign, and they can be one sign apart. So if you've got the Sun in Gemini, you can have Mercury in Taurus, Cancer, or in Taurus, Gemini, or Cancer. You cannot have the Sun in Gemini and Mercury in Leo. It's just not possible. Venus, by contrast, is able to go further apart. You can have, for example, the Sun in Scorpio and Venus in Capricorn. So you can have it two signs apart. So there is greater space for Venus to operate. And to get an idea about Venus in Capricorn, I thought I would just finish by looking at some Venus in Capricorn charts. And the charts I've chosen are all women. The reason I've gone for all women is because, when you're talking about Venus in Capricorn, or Venus in general, Venus in any sign, there is always this question about, to what extent is it projected? Because a man's Venus it's a female planet, and it might well be that a man will project his Venus onto his partner, wife, perhaps his mother, the women in his life. Whereas a woman, it's her Venus, it's a female planet, she gets to keep it. She is unlikely to project it. So I thought I would look at Venus in Capricorn women. Of course, these are Venus in Capricorn women that I've sort of looked at before, that I kind of find interesting. So it is a totally biased sample. So let's start with Germany, a chart that I've looked at quite a lot. I'm not going to say a great deal about her, but from a political point of view, one of the most important women in German politics, and that is Alice Weidel. Alice Weidel is the one of the leaders of the AfD, which is sort of a right-wing party in Germany. That some people on the centre, I think the Social Democrats, are very keen to ban the AfD. I'm not quite sure how that works. It would seem to be quite a counterproductive thing to do. And the thing about Alice Weidel is her Venus. I mean, she's got a Venus return coming up, so I don't know what she's doing over Christmas, but she's got Venus conjunct her own Venus. And I don't have a time of birth for Alice Weidel, but her Venus will be, I suppose, somewhere between 0 degrees Capricorn and 2 degrees Capricorn, and so her Venus, it is on the solstice point. So with her Venus on the solstice point, you can imagine how that might be quite an advantage if one wants to go into politics. So it's a strong Venus on the solstice point, and it's not projected. It is. It's all about her. And Capricorn is a sign which perhaps has a familiarity with politics. There is something political about the sign, about this sign. So Venus in Capricorn, you could see that as sort of a woman who is in politics, who is interested in politics, who wants to project herself, who is quite into her own power. So that's Alice Vidal. And another woman who certainly had ideas about what she could achieve, didn't really work out, was Elizabeth Holmes. I think she's in prison at the moment, isn't she? She set up, I can't remember what was the company's called. She had this box or something for testing blood, and it was supposed to be completely revolutionary, and she was able to persuade all these investors. I suppose she was a young woman, and women in tech, that's something that people wanted to encourage. And her company was theoretically worth billions and billions at one stage, and then it all came falling down. And she has Venus in Capricorn, and Venus in Capricorn, well, you could say that Venus in Capricorn at its worst is just wanting to be successful for the sake of it. We have to be successful. She wanted to be successful, and even though she was pushing a device that didn't work, she just carried on. She did whatever it takes. So that could be a negative side to Venus in Capricorn. And maybe one reason for this was the fact that she had this conjunction with Jupiter. Now, you'd think that a Venus-Jupiter conjunction would be quite fortunate. I mean, the two benefics, well, to an extent it was quite fortunate. But it went wrong in the end, and she has Jupiter, because she has Jupiter in Capricorn. Jupiter is fallen in Capricorn, so Jupiter in Capricorn, people with Jupiter in Capricorn can just be obsessed about just success for the sake of it. It can be very narrow. They're not really thinking about the vision. I mean, apologies if you've got Jupiter in Capricorn, but not everyone uses their Jupiter in Capricorn the way Elizabeth Holmes does. So I'm just thinking that Venus-Jupiter just might have got a bit out of control. I mean, it gave her the good fortune. It gave her the ability to set up this company, and of course she had the charisma to do it. I mean, Venus sextile Mars. And so, I mean, that also says something about her Venus. So Venus in the exaltation of Mars. So Venus sextile Mars, gave her the young woman, charismatic up to a point, and so perhaps that helped her bring in all the investors. But it perhaps was a triumph of style over substance. And when you've got Venus in Capricorn, you may well have an attraction to power, even if you're not able to be powerful yourself. Eva Braun, who was, in the end, she married Hitler in the end. They committed suicide just afterwards. So she had Venus in Capricorn, and so you might say that she had ideas about herself and perhaps what she could achieve. I think she worked in a photographer's shop, and she was kind of discovered by Hitler. Hitler took a shine to her, if I got that right, and so she saw the advantage. I mean, if she's hooked up with the most powerful person in Germany, Venus in Capricorn, that's fine. I mean, that's what Venus in Capricorn is looking for, and so that might be all one needs to say about Venus in Capricorn. And another woman who was very much linked to Nazis was Magda Goebbels, Joseph Goebbels' wife. Likewise, she had Venus in Capricorn, and like Elizabeth Holmes, she had a Venus Jupiter conjunction in Capricorn. So Magda Goebbels had Venus at 3 degrees Capricorn, Jupiter at 10 degrees Capricorn. Elizabeth Holmes kind of has it reversed, Jupiter at 3 degrees and Venus at 10 degrees Capricorn. I mean, clearly she got heavily involved with Nazis in the end. I think was her first husband. I think one of her husbands Jewish, I think. But anyway, she got caught up with the whole Nazi thing, and with Venus. Venus in Capricorn, she saw the power, and she just got involved with Joseph Goebbels, probably because it was the right thing to do. It was the appropriate thing to do. Of course, it all ended in tragedy. She didn't leave Berlin, and she ended up killing all her children. But that is perhaps a negative way in which Venus in Capricorn works, and maybe she hadn't got a clue what she was doing. Venus was conjunct Chiron. It was also opposition Neptune. And sort of moving over to the United States, a couple of women associated with Donald Trump have Venus in Capricorn. Pam Bondi, who is Trump's Attorney General, she has got Venus in Capricorn, and her Venus in Capricorn at 12 degrees 15 Capricorn is opposition the United States' Sun in Cancer. That might not be a great sort of a great opposition to have. Maybe there's something troubling between her and the United States. So I don't know, but Venus in Capricorn, again, she's a woman who's involved in politics. Perhaps she has a natural feel for politics, and she does what is necessary. Again, I don't know a great deal about Pam Bondi, but it probably Venus in Capricorn. I mean, working in her favor, I would say. There's nothing necessarily wrong with having Venus in Capricorn, and she's able to use it. And she's got Saturn in Pisces, so she's got a Saturn return coming up. So she is going to be, she'll be 60 in. Oh, she's just turned 60 actually, but she's had her Saturn return, but Saturn is still in. She's got Saturn in Pisces. Obviously Saturn right now is in Pisces, so she's got Venus and Saturn in mutual reception, in mixed reception, because Venus is in Saturn's sign, Saturn is in Venus's exaltation, and another of Trump's women is Kristi Noem. Now, she was the governor of South Dakota, I think, South, not North. I think it was South Dakota, and she's now in charge of Homeland Security. She is the one who's actively involved in the deportations, and she's got her Venus in Capricorn, quite close to the solstice point. So she's a Sagittarius. Her sun, she's got all these Sagittarius planets, and she seems to, she gets herself into trouble by what she says, and also by what she writes, or what is published. I don't know who wrote her book. Whether did she write herself, or was it ghostwritten? I don't know, but where she talks about killing a dog and a goat, that didn't go down well. I think that ended any chance she might have had of being Trump's vice president. But that's her Sagittarius. Those are her Sagittarius planets. But then her Venus in Capricorn planets probably sort of helped her as she sort of moved forward in terms of South Dakota politics, becoming governor of South Dakota, and then moving into Trump's cabinet. So I think we're getting that theme of women in politics, perhaps, with Venus in Capricorn, and A couple more women in politics, some more successful than others. Rachel Reeves, the Chancellor of the Exchequer in the UK, she has got her Venus in Capricorn, Venus trine Saturn. On the surface, that looks perfectly fine for being Britain's finance minister. I mean, we call them Chancellor of the Exchequer. So Venus in Capricorn, trine Saturn in Virgo. Apparently she always wanted to be Chancellor of the Exchequer, and she admired Gordon Brown, who was a Chancellor of the Exchequer under Tony Blair. So that might be the aim, and she's got Moon in Virgo, so you can see why she might want to be Chancellor. But can we see why she has been, of course, a disastrous Chancellor, as far as I can see. I don't know to what extent that is her fault. There's a question about whether or not she's fully qualified. I don't know. She did exaggerate her CV, but anyway, she does have Venus in Capricorn, and even though politically she's not a popular woman, she did at least get to be Britain's Chancellor of the Exchequer. And finally, there is Yulia Tymoshenko. Remember her? Well, remember the Orange Revolution in Ukraine in 2004. And so Yulia Tymoshenko, I think she became a prime minister. I think she became a prime minister. And she was, or I get them mixed up, the prime minister and the president. There were two of them, and there was one of them that got poisoned, I think with dioxin or something, and he had to be treated in a hospital in Germany. But Yulia Tymoshenko, she was the one who had the hair. I mean, she had blonde hair, but was in these. I don't know how to describe it. Her hair was very, very carefully done with these sort of whirls of circles. I have no idea what it's called, but it was plaited in a particular way that was very distinctive. And yeah, she has had Venus in Capricorn, and she had Venus-Saturn conjunction in Capricorn, and she had been very successful, I think, in the energy sector. I think she made huge amounts of money in the energy sector, and then she got into politics. One of those people that I think made a lot of money after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and so she has that Venus-Saturn conjunction in Capricorn and Jupiter in Capricorn as well. So she knows how to look after her own interests, and she hasn't gone away. I mean, she's still around. And she's sometimes talked about as a potential successor to Zelensky. And I mean, who knows? Maybe that Venus in Capricorn is going to help her, emerge. I mean, she's still young enough. I mean, she's born in 1960, so she's just turned 65, so I mean, there's no reason why she can't be president of Ukraine again. Or was she president? Again, no, I think she was prime minister, but there's no reason why she can't be president if there was an election. She's certainly a possibility, and that Venus in Capricorn might help. So those are a few thoughts on Venus in Capricorn. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.